Today we're going to talk about this amazing book, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. One of my teachers introduced me to it when I was in high school, and I've loved it ever since. It's a Bildungsroman, or coming-of-age story, because it focuses on Janie Crawford's journey of self-discovery from the age of 16 into her 40s. As Janie goes through different relationships with partners and changes in her life, sometimes making choices that are considered a little controversial, she learns who she wants to be and what really brings her fulfillment versus what people say should bring her fulfillment. So she learns to be brave enough to change her mind and say, I want to go in a different direction. It also fits within African American literature, Southern Gothic, and it's a classic of American realism. And it's also included in the feminist literature of the Harlem Renaissance. First, let's talk about the plot. And then at the end, we'll talk about themes, character development, and the author. Janie has her first kiss when she's 16 years old. And through her daydreams, we see that she has this really idealized and innocent view about love and sexuality. She thinks that love and sexuality are naturally intertwined. Like they always go together and they're just a natural part of being married. Like it just happens when you get married. And you stay in perpetual bliss forever, like a fairy tale. And her understanding of sexuality is largely based on the interaction that she sees in the springtime between bees and flowers. Zora writes, "She was stretched on her back beneath the pear tree, soaking in the alto chant of the visiting bees, the gold of the sun, and the panting breath of the breeze, when the inaudible voice of it all came to her. She saw a dust-bearing bee sink into the sanctum of a bloom. The thousand sister calyxes arched to meet the love embrace in the ecstatic shiver of the tree, from root to tiniest branch, creaming in every blossom and frothing with delight. So this was a marriage. She had been summoned to behold a revelation. Then Janie felt a pain, remorseless sweet, that left her limp and languid." Super erotic. Look at that language and the imagery. It's an orgasm, but portrayed through nature. But Janie's life is controlled by her grandmother, Janie Crawford, who sees marriage as a means to security, not romance or passion. So when Janie is 16 or 17, Janie Crawford forces her to marry a man called Logan because he has a lot of land. They haven't dated at all. They're not even friends. But Janie's hoping that love will just kind of like magically happen after the marriage ceremony. But it doesn't. And in fact, she notices that Logan's attitude changes completely towards her after they get married. Like before the marriage, he was kind of sweet and kind, decent. But then after the marriage, he's pushing her to work really hard on the farm, like hard labor. And she's more like an employee than a wife. And whenever Janie complains, Logan reminds her of where he pulled her from. So it's like she should basically be so grateful because of where she came from, and that she just has to do all the work that he's putting on her all day, every day. And when she complains to her grandmother, she kind of gets a similar response from her own grandmother. Her grandmother reminds her that she's the only one in town with an organ, like a big piano, in her home. She's the only person with a big house that's bought and paid for by her husband and 60 acres of land. Janie Crawford just wants to see her granddaughter taken care of before she passes away. And she sees love and romance and all that as really just a distraction that can be dangerous and painful. But Janie wants love. She wants poetry. She's 16. She wants to be that flower experiencing complete ecstasy when the bee sinks into it. And instead, she gets hard labor on a farm. So Janie starts wondering, is there anything else? So Janie waited a bloom time and a green time and an orange time. But when the pollen again golded the sun and sifted down on the world, she began to stand around the gate and expect things. What things? She didn't know exactly. You can see how Zora shows you the passage of time here with the colors representing the seasons. One day, Janie sees a guy and he's passing by, and this is Jody, or Joe. He goes by both. And he's really well dressed, and he's really ambitious, and he has all these great plans for the future. He's just shiny, And he essentially invites her to come along with him because she's young and she's really pretty. She's like 17 here. And because of the way that Janie's already feeling in her marriage to Logan, she leaves with Joe. What was she losing so much time for? A feeling of sudden newness and change came over her. Janie hurried out of the front gate and turned south. Even if Joe was not there waiting for her, the change was bound to do her good. The morning road air was like a new dress. That made her feel the apron tied around her waist. She untied it and flung it on a low bush beside the road and walked on. Now, Jody is completely different from Logan, and his expectations are different too. Jody wants to take on the world. He is ambitious. He wants a position of distinction, He's an entrepreneurial sort of person. He wants to be a big deal. So they get to a small town, and Jody decides that he's going to set up a main store, which makes him really popular and soon makes him really wealthy. And he eventually even becomes mayor of Eatonville, the town. So on the surface, Janie's in a really good position now. She has this big, beautiful house, probably nicer than the other one she had with Logan. She's the mayor's wife, and people treat her with respect, and she's not working outside anymore in the sun, and they're making money all the time. They live really, really well. But then she realizes that he kind of treats her like just another pretty thing that he owns, like another piece of property that he keeps around because it makes him look good. He's not really interested in her as a person. They just need to look good to other people as a unit. In fact, he goes out of his way sometimes to put her down in front of everybody, saying that she's not smart, that she should just stick to looking pretty in the store. And it's really just because he's really insecure, and he puts her down to build himself up by comparison and take attention away from his own imperfections, because she is younger and she is so pretty. But this kills any semblance of friendship or attraction that they might have had before. So gradually, she pressed her teeth together and learned to hush. The spirit of the marriage left the bedroom and took to living in the parlor. It was there to shake hands whenever the company came to visit, but it never went back inside the bedroom again. She wasn't petal open with him anymore. She was 24 and 7 years married when she knew. She found out one day when he slapped her face in the kitchen. Janie was a good cook, and Joe had looked forward to his dinner as a refuge from other things. So when the bread didn't rise and the fish wasn't quite done at the bone and the rice was scorched, he slapped Janie until she had a ringing sound in her ears and told her about her brains before he stalked on back to the store. Janie stood where he left her for unmeasured time and thought. She stood there until something fell off the shelf inside her. Then she went inside there to see what it was. It was her image of Jody, tumbled down and shattered. But looking at it, she saw that it never was the flesh and blood figure of her dreams, just something she had grabbed up to drape her dreams over. She found that she had a host of thoughts she had never expressed to him, and numerous emotions she had never let Jody know about. Things packed up and put away in parts of her heart where he could never find them. She was saving up feelings for some man she had never seen. She had an inside and an outside now, and suddenly she knew how not to mix them. So you see that the focus of appearances and his refusal to acknowledge his insecurities and his need to put her down publicly just kind of killed the marriage. Here's an example from chapter 7. One day she noticed that Joe didn't sit down. He just stood in front of a chair and fell in it. That made her look at him all over. Jody wasn't so young as he used to be. There was already something dead about him. Jody must have noticed it too. Maybe he had seen it long before Janie did and had been fearing for her to see, because he began to talk about her age all the time as if he didn't want her to stay young while he grew old. It got to be terrible in the store. The more his back ached and his muscle dissolved into fat and the fat melted off the bones, the more fractious he became with Janie, especially in the store. The more people in there, the more ridicule he poured over her body to point attention away from his own. And one day, when he's humiliating her in front of people, she loses her cool and humiliates him right back. And he can't take it. Jody says, a woman stays around a store till she gets old as Methuselah. By the way, Methuselah's like 900 years old. He's a biblical figure. And still can't cut a little thing like a plug of tobacco. Don't stand there rolling your Popeyes at me with your rump hanging nearly to your knees. So Jody's saying in front of everybody that not only is Janie old, she doesn't know how to do even the simplest part of her job, and she's so old that her butt is hanging down to the back of her knees in front of everybody. A big laugh started off in the store, but people got to thinking and stopped. It was funny if you looked at it right quick, but it got pitiful if you thought about it a while. It was like somebody snatched off part of a woman's clothes while she wasn't looking, and the streets were crowded. Then, too, Janie took the middle of the floor to talk right into Jody's face. And that was something that hadn't been done before. So when Janie talks back, he responds to her. You ain't no young girl to be getting all insulted about your looks. You ain't no young courting gal. You're an old woman, nearly 40. And Janie replies, yeah, I'm nearly 40 and you're already 50. How come you can't talk about that sometimes instead of always pointing at me? Jody says, ain't no use in getting all mad, Janie. Nobody in here ain't looking for no wife out of you, old as you is. And Janie fires back and says, no, I ain't no young girl no more, but I ain't no old woman neither. I reckon I looks my age too, but I'm a woman every inch of me and I know it. That's a whole lot more than you can say. You big bellies around here and put out a lot of brag, but there ain't nothing to it but your big voice. Talking about me looking old? When you pull down your britches, you look like the change of life. And here, when she talks about him pulling his pants down and talks about the change of life, aging, she's referring to impotence. And this is in front of everybody in the store. Then Joe Starks realized all the meanings, and his vanity bled like a flood. Janie had robbed him of his illusion of irresistible maleness that all men cherish, which was terrible. She had cast down his empty armor before men, and they had laughed. For what can excuse a man in the eyes of other men for lack of strength? Joe Starks didn't know the words for all this, but he knew the feeling. So he struck Janie with all his might and drove her from the store. So they stay in this fractured marriage until he dies, keeping up appearances. But it's never the same again. And when Jody dies, Janie's in her late 30s or about 40. And she goes through the motions of wearing black and doing what's expected of her. But she's really just super relieved that he's gone. And she just keeps managing the store alone in peace. And she's not looking for love or marriage or anything. Until a handsome younger man called Tea Cake walks into the store one day. And he notices her and approaches her in a very different way than any other man has. He doesn't treat her like the mayor's wife, He talks to her like Janie, like a friend, without controlling her or restraining her or humiliating her. No man has ever treated her like that, like an equal her entire life. He offers to help her around the store. He invites her to a game of chess. He actually engages her in conversation. He takes her fishing. He makes her laugh. He just treats her like a person. And she's definitely not interested in marriage at first. And there's tons of gossip because he's like 25 and she's like 40. And he's broke and she's a wealthy widow. But she's finally experiencing all that joy and romance that she dreamed of when she was 16. She couldn't make him look just like any other man to her. He looked like the love thoughts of women. He could be a bee to a blossom, a pear tree blossom in the spring. He seemed to be crushing scent out of the world with his footsteps, crushing aromatic herbs with every step he took. Spices hung about him. He was a glance from God. And my favorite line is this one. Janie looked down on him and felt a self-crushing love. He's sleeping here. So her soul crawled out from its hiding place. So Janie sells her house and the store to have a fresh start in a new city with tea cake. And they can live without people gossiping about them and being nosy. What I like about how Zora Neale Hurston wrote this relationship with tea cake is that it's not perfect. There's definitely love there, but it's not a fairy tale. Tea cake is a gambler. He has a jealous streak, and she has to work really hard alongside him for them to survive. She doesn't have the comfortable life she used to have, and he makes really bad decisions sometimes, like staying in town when a huge hurricane is coming, which leads to a huge tragedy. But Janie has agency in this relationship. She's making her own decisions. She's not like somebody's employee or a piece of pretty property. So what we see is real love between two imperfect people in an imperfect situation. After tea cake, Janie has to find peace with being on her own, which is another point of growth for her. At this point, she's had to learn that love is not a given in marriage, and money doesn't necessarily make you happy 100%. And sometimes you fall in love with somebody that you never expected or that nobody approves of. And also, sometimes you have to choose yourself, even when you really do love the other person. But at this point in the novel, Janie has to learn to be a person on her own and feel good without having a partner at all. There are many conflicts in the novel between Janie and her grandmother, and Janie and her 3 husbands, and Janie and the people in town. But I really want to mention man versus nature here, especially if you think of nature as being God. The title of the book comes from this idea. There's a point in the novel when there's a horrible hurricane, and it says, the people's eyes were watching God because they're fighting for their lives in this hurricane. In this conflict with nature, they're at God's mercy, irrespective of what people had planned for themselves. So in a wider sense, there's a conflict between what people plan to have or do in their lives and the surprises that life throws at you, like a hurricane, or becoming the wife of a mayor when you never expected him to be mayor, or getting the perfect life and having it feel awful, or falling in love with someone 15 years your junior when you least expect it. All of those things force the reader to think about how much choice or power we have to be who we want to be, even in the midst of all the unforeseen things that take you off course or off of what you thought life was going to turn out to be. We can't talk about Their Eyes Were Watching God without talking about language. One of the things that jumps out at you immediately is Zora's voice. Her prose is lyrical. It's poetic. It's beautiful. I'm such a fan. Hurston's use of the vernacular, which is the way that people just talk in a certain time and place, is totally realistic with all the slang and the expressions that people would have used in Eatonville in the 1930s. And it creates characters that sound like real people on the page. The theme of language is also important because language is used as a powerful tool that can build people up or tear people down. Like how Jody humiliates Janie with words in front of people to feel better about himself, and how Tea Cake uses language, the way he talks to her like an equal, to get past her defenses. You also see the destructiveness and the mean-spiritedness of the town's gossips. When they gossip about all her different relationships or how she looks. And later on, when she comes back to Eatonville in her 40s, alone, without Tea Cake. These sitters had been tongueless, earless, eyeless conveniences all day long. Mules and other brutes had occupied their skins. But now the sun and the boss men were gone, so their skins felt powerful and human. They became lords of sounds and lesser things. They passed nations through their mouths. They sat in judgment. Seeing the woman as she was made them remember the envy they had stored up from other times. So they chewed up the back parts of their minds and swallowed with relish. They made burning statements with questions and killing tools out of laughs. It was mass cruelty. A mood come alive. Words walking without masters. Walking all together like harmony in a song. What's she doing coming back here in them overalls? Can't she find no dress to put on? Where's that blue satin dress she left here in? Where's all that money her husband took and died and left her? What's that old 40-year-old woman doing with her hair swinging down her back like she's some young gal? Or she left that young lad of a boy she went off here with, thought she was gonna marry. Where he left her? What he done with all her money? Bet you he off with some gal so young she ain't even got no hairs. Why don't she stay in her class? In the end, when Janie is standing trial for shooting tea cake, Janie's allowed to speak. And she's using language this time to tell the truth the way it is about her own life instead of having other people tell her life for her, which is a really powerful use of language. The central message of the novel is really about women finding a way to balance being individuals and also managing the expectations and the needs of everyone else around them at the same time. How do you balance meeting the expectations of being a granddaughter, or a wife, or a friend, or a business owner, with also just being your own person and taking care of yourself and what you know that you need? Until what age are you allowed to look and feel young and sexy? How much age difference will society allow between two consenting adults, especially an older woman and a younger man? What do we owe each other in marriage? What makes a good marriage good? These are timeless questions, and they apply today just as much as they did in the 1930s. And even though the book focuses on African American community in the 1930s, I would argue that these are questions that are relevant to women all over the world, regardless of time and place. I do want to make sure I tell you a little bit about Zora. Zora Neale Hurston lived at the turn of the century. She was born in Alabama, and she moved to Florida when she was 3 years old. The setting of this book, Eatonville, Florida, is the town that she lived in as a child. Zora was a prolific, gifted writer and anthropologist, and she wrote novels, short stories, plays, essays, an autobiography, ethnographic works as an anthropologist. But she was pretty much dismissed during her lifetime commercially, and she died in poverty. And it was really only after her death, like many writers, and it was largely because of the efforts of another writer, Alice Walker, that Zora was actually recognized for the amazing writer that she was. I think Their Eyes Were Watching God is really seminal in terms of its place in American literature. I don't usually reread books, but this is one that gets better with time, and it gets better. The older you get, the better the book gets, if that makes sense. And the beauty of the language is just mind-blowing. I would love to know what you think. Did you love it? Did you hate it? I would love to hear your thoughts about the vernacular. And I will see you soon for the next great story. Bye.